All
Right.
Hey, everybody out there. It's the patriotic version of the C4AA webinar. And what number are we now, Steve?
We are at number 20.
Number
Um,
20. And it's
yeah,
a very
here.
special number
Ta-da.
20. It's like a bicentennial version. There we go. Woo! And it's in celebration of the first female president of the United States. You may not know there was the first female president of the United States, but there was a first female president of the United States. And we have her here with us today to talk about what it's like to be the first female president of the United States and also talk about what it's like to perform the first female president of the United States of America.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, all politics is theater, as I'm sure you know. So welcome, hello, greetings, my fellow Americans and any listeners from abroad. It's a pleasure to have you join us this morning. And I'm thrilled to have been invited by Steve and Steve to participate in this webinar today. We're just over a year into my presidency. As Steve mentioned, despite the passage of time, it's true that not everyone is necessarily aware that I'm the president, yet here we are. So very happy to reflect on what it's been like to be a first-time politician and the surprise and continued honor that it is for me to help lead the country.
I'd like to say, Madam President, you are an inspiration in so many ways. You've inspired us. And one of the ways you've inspired us is you've taken this bold move to be the first female president of the United States of America. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about where this momentous act of yours came from.
Yeah, oh, thank you so much for that question. You know, the fall 2016 election, as I'm sure you all recall, was a heavily contested election. The Democrats and Republicans both fought hard. And the outcome was a surprise to everyone, myself very much included. I voted for Hillary. But here we are. You know? And while I am new to politics and was not anticipating serving my country in this fashion, I do take my duties as president very seriously. It's a great charge. But democracy, as you know, is made by all of us. It's not just about me. And so that's why one of my first acts as president was to open source the government and put out a call for anyone who wanted to serve as an advisor in any capacity, formally or informally. And so all of my policy platforms have been written by folks like yourselves who self-identified and said, yes, you know, I actually know a lot about criminal justice reform, and I want to make sure that we have a criminal justice system here in the United States that treats all people equally and has a focus on restorative justice away from punishment. And, so I've really appreciated that.
You know, so much has changed in the last year that I barely remembered that.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. You know, we were able to accomplish a lot in my first 100 days. I'm proud to share we were able to permanently halt work on the Dakota Access and Keystone XL pipelines, that we doubled the number of refugees that we accept into this country, and we're working on expanding pathways to immigration and pathways to citizenship for folks who are already in this country and are contributing to our nation.
So Madam President, may I ask you, what is the function of creating such an inspirational model for the rest of the country and the world? That is like, how does that work in us as, like, we might use the word audience or citizens, whichever way you want to look at it?
Right. Well, this is a participatory democracy, Steve. So, audience, citizens, participants, we fill all of these roles. You know, one thing that I've thought a lot about is that when times are tough, whether personally or on a national level, we all, as individuals, we need points of inspiration, we need points of hope, we need to be able to remember and imagine not just how to win the immediate struggle that we find ourselves in, but what we want to work for long term, what our vision of a better future looks like. And I found that particularly when we're in the trenches, when we have to be fighting really hard, when things are really a struggle, that if we don't make space for that more beautiful version of America, that version that maybe has never existed yet, but that we know we want to work towards, it can be hard to have the motivation to get up in the morning and keep fighting. So that's a lot of what my administration is committed to, is making sure that we're providing the vision of the America that we want to see in the world.
So,
Steve,
your first executive order was this declaration to sort of provide that vision of, you know, okay, we have the first female president, here I am. Can you tell us about, I mean, everyone saw your inauguration, but again, so much has happened. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how that went and why your inauguration was so different than inaugurations that had come before.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. My inauguration was fairly different than that of many of my predecessors, though, of course, many of our democratic traditions have not been the same throughout time, though we feel that they are. One key change, of course, is that I am governing remotely from my home in San Francisco.
Right.
So I just thought I would save taxpayers the expense of moving me to DC. I already got a life here and a bicycle, so just staying in San Francisco. And technology is a wonderful thing. It connects us all here today and lets me govern too. So, but my inauguration specifically, reflecting that, was held here in San Francisco on the steps of City Hall. Was, you know, proud and honored to have a crowd of dozens of supporters show up. It was not necessarily full of the same pomp and circumstance that might have attended some previous inaugurations, but again, this was a surprise outcome to the election. So my team really worked hard to put together a ceremony pretty much turning on a dime. So,
well, and if you look at that picture, I think that is the largest crowd we have ever actually seen assemble for inauguration.
Thank you. I don't like to brag.
So humble, Madam President.
Yeah, and as you can see in this photo, a little bit that my inauguration was really supported by members of my community who have been involved with my life and my work in various capacities for sometimes over a decade. So as I mentioned, this was a bit of a scrappy affair. The sound system was biked over to City Hall by a former roommate. The podium was on loan from a local bookstore. The photographer is a professional photographer, but someone I know from study abroad back in college. So it really took the resources of the whole community to pull this event off.
Well, and this is an important lesson for democracy, isn't it? Because we often have started to think about democracy as something that other people do. People with big budgets, with millionaires behind them. And one of the things that's been so inspiring about your presidency is how you realized that you could just take an idea, a radical idea, a visionary idea, and actually make it happen by using resources which are around you. And that to me is really inspiring. And one of the things that we do in our own trainings, I know it's ridiculous to compare ourselves, but in any case, just from the humble people, we often, you know, we will stage actions with our workshops in which we only have 24 hours to actually plan, build all the props, and execute an action, which invariably means you have to cut corners, you have to call friends, you have to figure out, oh my gosh, we aren't able to get a large blow-up elephant, so what are we going to do? And it's that ability to be nimble and to draw upon other people's resources that allow incredible things to happen.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And, you know, I've sometimes found that even what seems like a setback can end up being a point of inspiration and a strength, right? So what you're saying about not being able to get a blow up elephant maybe requires you to come up with another solution that ends up being more creative, more rewarding, and more eye-catching than the blow up elephant would have ever been in the first place.
And can you give us some examples from your own first year of things, sort of experimenting, prototypes, and how you've sort of developed your presidency and its policies on the fly?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's been an incredible year. And I've learned so much about politics, about governance, and about how to really do my best in serving the people of this country. When I started in this project, what I imagined my presidency would largely consist of, working here in the Oval Office, recording some video broadcasts to share, but a lot to do with a very interior idea of government, right? I would be in the office, I would be writing, I would be responding in this way. And what I found was, of course, that's important work, but I really heard that people liked interactive events with their leader. People want to be able to talk to politicians. They don't want to feel like there's this wall between them and the leadership that governs the country, right? And as I said earlier, democracy is never just about one person. That's antithetical to the project. So it's never just about me, right? It's about what we can do together. So while of course I continue to write executive orders and focus on my role as the president, it's also very important to me that I am organizing and participating in events where I get to meet people like this adorable baby face to face, get to really hear from people, but also build collaboratively with them on different kinds of work. So a couple examples of that. One was an event that we held in the summer of last year, where we realized after passing executive orders related to immigrants and refugees, we wanted to make sure people knew how welcome they are in this country. And so I and a small group of my fellow citizens went to the international terminal of San Francisco Airport, and we brought signs saying welcome in multiple languages. And as people arrived from their different international flights, we welcomed them with signs and we gave them a flower just to let them know that we were so happy to have them here in the United States, wherever they were coming from, whether they were here for a short time or whether they hoped to be here for the rest of their lives, they were welcome. And an airport is a wonderful place to extend that gesture of welcome.
Yeah, I would say that there's been a real turn in your presidency since the beginning of this interacting with the public, and that has been, people have remarked, one of the most successful parts of your presidency is these personal events. How did you realize that was working, and how have you built upon that success?
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of the challenges for me is that being the president can be very isolating. And sometimes, to be very honest about it, I've kind of gotten in my head and thought, who am I to be the president? Right?
What?
Yeah,
really?
it's true, Steve. It's true. I have questioned myself. There have been times when I woke up in the morning and thought, Margaret, what are you doing? And
you're Margaret McCarthy. You're the president.
I know, but I think it's really important to share that even when I have been imbued with such authority, I still experience doubt, uncertainty. I question my purpose. And it was in those times when I found myself feeling isolated that I realized I didn't have to be, and that the best way to combat those feelings of isolation was to actually get out of my office and into the public and find a way to build the kind of community that inspires me and that makes me feel excited to serve in this role.
Right. So tell us about this event. So this looks like a ribbon cutting.
Yeah, the ribbon cutting ceremony that was held at a local university, University of San Francisco, here in the city, and the students in this class had put together an exhibition on copy culture. So it's an arts program, and they're looking at what does it mean to take something that already exists in the world and replicate it in some form, right? Yeah. You could do a direct replication, or you could do maybe a kind of artistic reinterpretation of it, a riff, a collage. There's a lot of different approaches that they took in this work, and so I was honored. I was invited by their professor to come give some opening remarks, and it was a real treat to be there. You can see that Xerox machine in the background, so there was a lot of physical copying happening, but we also spoke about copying on a more philosophical level too. and how copying is not necessarily a negative thing, and that a lot of the American project, you know, we're not the first democracy in the world. Hopefully, we're not going to be the last either. And even these ideas, these democratic ideals, are ones that we have copied over from our idea of what democracy looked like to the ancient Greeks.
So this, I was just going to ask, Madam President, how did this come about? Like, did they come to you? Did you approach them? How do people book events with the President of the United States in your administration?
Yeah, well, I am very happy to participate in events where people would like to have me. So in this instance, they approached me. I knew the professor of this class, and we were talking, and she invited me to deliver this opening ceremony and ribbon cutting. This, of course, is the ribbon before it was cut. But I'm very thrilled and delighted to speak at these kinds of events, and I think we'll get to my contact information later, but I'm very easy to get in touch with. My email, Twitter, all the social media. It helps if you're local to the Bay Area. But I have also spoken to a college class remotely about my role as president, which was a pleasure.
Yeah, what is so inspiring about you, Madam President, is you don't stay in your office. You actually don't stay in what we might say a theater space. But actually what you do is you seem to find these spaces out there in the world and then transform them into what you want them to be. And is that a conscious choice on your part, and something that maybe the citizens and audiences, as we're calling them now, might learn from?
Yeah, thank you. It is a conscious choice to remember that sometimes you can, as I think we tried to do at the airport, you can take an experience that might be routine or humdrum, something that already exists, and it has a routine or maybe certain rituals around it, and that any of us really have the opportunity at any point to interrupt those rituals or sort of cast them in a new light that allows the people present to step back and say, whoa, I thought I knew what was happening here, but maybe I'm wrong.
Right. I'm reminded of Bertolt Brecht's idea of alienation, in which sometimes the most effective way to get a message to people is to break their idea of the norm, and therefore have them look and say, well, why is this normal? Or perhaps in this case, why is this not normal? That we would have this female president, welcoming immigrants into our country.
Exactly.
My hat is off to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Madam President, you, along these lines, appeared at, the march, had women's
victory march.
The Women's Victory March, and you inserted a sort of presence into that march in this similar way. Could you talk about that for a minute, please?
Absolutely. So while my inauguration was a surprise, it was responded to with great enthusiasm all over the world, actually, which was deeply flattering. I'm sure many of you remember the women's marches that were held both here in the United States and across the globe in support of my election. So this photo that you have here, thanks for putting that up, is a photo from the Women's March in DC, Washington, DC, where I was honored to be present. And some of my supporters carried signs talking about my presidency, my election, and how thrilled they were that finally we have a woman in the White House. Now, we know representation does not end discrimination, right? As we have seen with my predecessor, President Obama, having someone in the White House who is a Black person did not end racism in this country. Having a woman in the White House will not end sexism in this country, right? We have a long road ahead of us. But we also know that when we can start to offer these visions to people, even though it doesn't achieve equality, it allows our imagination to think about what might it look like if this were not exceptional, if this were regular.
What were some of the reactions that you had at the march? How did people receive, when they got to finally meet you?
Oh, I had such a warm welcome from so many people, and being at the march was a joy of my life and a source of great personal inspiration. I met people who had been on, an overnight bus for 12 hours to get to DC, folks who were local, people for whom this was their first time showing up at any kind of march, and people who had been at marches and protests for decades. And it was a real moment of just community togetherness and inspiration. And while, of course, like any movement, there's so much more that always has to be done to make sure that it's inclusive, that we're truly reaching all the people who should be invited and who should be present. It was an extraordinary event.
I'm reminded, Madam President, of another female leader, Margaret Thatcher, who was famous for tamping down people's hopes by saying there is no alternative to capitalism. So much so that it was coined as TINA. There is no alternative. And one of the things we've always thought about here at the center is that there's two ways to keep people down. One is you keep them down with guns and boots and prison camps. But in the long run, that's not very effective, because sooner or later people rise up because they can see in front of them what's keeping them down. But a far more effective way to keep people down is to keep them from looking up, to imagine that there is no alternative, as Margaret Thatcher once said. And it strikes me as that the power of what you're doing, and shall we say what other people have done and will do following your example, is to create these radical alternatives, the imagination. And so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that power of imagination, which you've hinted at before.
Absolutely. And to speak to this specific point you've raised with the Margaret Thatcher quote, I'll offer you back. I'll have to paraphrase a quote from the recently deceased fiction writer Ursula K. Le Guin. As you may know, she said in a speech, more or less, capitalism is all around us. It seems inevitable, but so did the divine right of kings. And what I appreciated about that moment was, yes, in the Middle Ages, it seemed inconceivable, outside the scope of possibility, that you would not be ruled by someone who was chosen by God to rule over you. Mm-hmm. And yet his time has passed, and now we look on that as quaint.
Yes.
Right? We no longer consider that inevitable.
And what's so powerful about you is your, how shall we say this, bodily presence in the real world. That is this isn't just an abstract idea, opening up, say, Thomas More's Utopia and reading about it, or even, and I love Ursula Le Guin, reading a science fiction novel or a story which imagines a new world. But it almost seems as if, like, you are here.
Because I am.
Oh. Well, why is that so important for yourself to actually be a presence in the world and not just an idea on a piece of paper?
Yeah, thank you. I think there is something radical in our digital age about manifesting IRL, right? So showing up, right? Being present, looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand and say, it's a pleasure to meet you, right? Most people in the US do not get a chance to meet the president in their lifetimes. It's a math problem, if nothing else. So I am always thrilled when I get to meet people, whether they are active in politics or are just curious, or in the case of some folks at my inauguration, just happened to be passing by a civic center at that right time. And I think that when you're able to show up in reality, right? We might have a certain distrust of the internet, right? Anything could happen, Photoshop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're able to show up in front of someone and say, here I am, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, there's a directness to that I think can really, again, as we're talking about, like, allowing people to open their imagination, I think there's an opportunity there.
Can I just follow up, please?
Yeah.
People have often said politicians are inauthentic, fake, and performers. Is there sometimes a risk at performing as a politician, insofar as it, takes away from the authenticity and heartfeltness which is needed for social transformation and so on and so forth?
That is a really good question, and I think we've all had experiences of watching politicians seem fake. What is real and what is fake is a bigger question than I'm going to be able to answer on this webinar, but so much of that to me comes back to listening. And I think that often when we see politicians fail, it's because we see that they have something they want to say and they're going to say it. And it doesn't really matter what people are saying back to them or what they need to hear, because they just have a message, they have some talking points that they've just got to get out. You know, issues of performance are always very interesting to me as someone who candidly has a degree in theater and so studied performance formally for a long time. But I, like many performers, ultimately believe that theater and performance, the study of performance, are just a series of like tips and tricks to help you understand how to be more authentic in your physical body and your presence, right? In the same way that training to be an athlete doesn't make you fake at moving, right? It makes you better at moving. I believe that training to be a performer doesn't make you fake at being a person. It helps you understand how to listen and connect with people.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Are there, for someone who doesn't have the same background and education in theater that you have, that maybe had aspirations to, say, you know, be the president or something like that, what do you recommend? Like, what are some of the things that you found especially helpful?
Look, if there's one thing we've learned from 2016 to present, it's that anyone can be the president.
Right. Right.
So if this is an office that you aspire to, and if you're listening right now, my advice to you is don't let anyone stop you. You probably can be the president.
So just go for it.
Just go for it. I think that I think the more time you spend sitting and thinking and questioning, you will think up all the reasons that it won't work. You will think of all the things that could go wrong. And you're completely right. Those are all very good reasons that it won't work. And those are all things that could go wrong. And the more time you spend thinking about that, the less time you spend doing it. So I think it's much better to just pick it up and go and try it out. And as we were discussing earlier, you know, some of the things that you try are not going to work. Some of the things that I've tried, I thought, oh, that didn't really go the way I thought it would, right? It's a learning process.
Mm-hmm. You know,
is more important.
If security wouldn't tackle me because of it, I would give you a hug just for saying that. But I also wanted to bring up that this presidency has had a very unusual relationship with the press. You know, some might say unprecedented relationship with the press. Can you talk a little bit about how you've handled the press and use the press in order to put forth your agenda?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I believe that so much of our life and our work is around communication, how we communicate with one another as individuals, and how I, as a somewhat untraditional president, you know, governing from San Francisco, how can I make sure that my message and my work is reaching people all across the country? So I have been fortunate to have some good relationships with some local media outlets. You know, it's not NBC, it's not ABC, it's not CBS.
Fake news.
But great local journalists like SF Weekly, a free publication, as well as local publication Broke Ass Stewart. You know, Steve, you may both know this. We have a proud tradition in San Francisco of people engaging with politics in very creative ways that I think dates back at least to Emperor Norton.
Right.
Sister Boom Boom, Jello Biafra. We have, yes, a long, wonderful tradition.
A very proud tradition. And so I was really thrilled that when I started talking to some different members of the press about my work, a lot of them just understood what was happening really right away, because they had this contextual history of how San Francisco engages creatively with politics, and sometimes in ways that might not look like what you read about in your history textbook.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get along with like local politicians there? Do you have relationships with the San Francisco City Council people or anything?
Yes, we have a local board of supervisors. I am largely focused on national issues, so I do respect their purview. San Francisco is doing a lot as a city to be a leader on in areas where cities can make a huge difference. So what can the city do to address climate change? A lot, it turns out, right? So San Francisco is doing a great job on multiple fronts on being a liberal city, a progressive city, a city that is trying to help lead a path forward. Obviously, we have extraordinary challenges here. We're in an affordability crisis that's been going on for years. That's a really challenging problem to unpack, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration. So these aren't problems that I can solve alone, and I do, of course, respect the authority of my local elected officials.
Yeah.
Madam President, you've been incredibly successful over this past year, but even the most successful people have failures, and you alluded to this early. Can you tell us a little bit about those things which didn't work as you had planned, and then how you learned from those mistakes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. There are failures and challenges that I could talk about on a couple of different platforms. One was, as I was saying, I had originally envisioned my work as president as doing a lot of this kind of video, sitting here in the Oval Office, as you see, and using that as a real platform to address people. But what I found was that coming from a non-traditional political background, it's actually hard to get the news out, right, about the video. People have short attention spans, right? They might not want to sit and watch a video for 2 minutes that's hard to find. So I thought, well, is this really an effective way to get the content out? It's great to be able to produce this work, but is this actually achieving my goals of communicating about my presidency and helping show my fellow citizens and residents a vision of the future that we want to create together? I didn't find it to be very successful. So that was something that early on I thought, oh wow, I thought this was a way that I was going to spend a lot of my time, and ended up being a way that I only spend a little bit of my time. Static images that you can share easily with friends ended up being a much easier way to get the message out and to get people inspired and excited than video content, which seems to require a higher buy-in from the audience. So that was one area of failure. Another thing that has been a challenge, candidly, as you know, we have a Republican-controlled Congress, and so there's a lot of work that I want to do, but I can't do it alone. So everyone who's listening, who's already working or planning on working on Get Out the Vote efforts in 2018, we need you. We've got to get more Democrats in the House and the Senate.
Right.
Thank you. How were you able to pivot from your mistake into a new strategy? Sometimes when I make a mistake, I just dwell on the mistake and kind of globalize it into a failure of a project. Do you have any tips for our fellow citizens about how to move from failure into sort of a new iteration?
Yeah, I do. And I really hear what you're saying about the mind likes to kind of spiral on failure, right? And soon it's not just this one thing failed, but the project failed and you failed and your failure, go back to bed, right? That's pretty easy for the brain to do. So you have to figure out a way to interrupt that cycle, right? For me, I've been able to do that in a few ways. One is through talking to my advisors, talking about when I'm stuck, admitting when I'm stuck, and recognizing for me that my presidency it's not a single moment. It's never a single victory. It's never a single failure. And of course, the challenge is that 4 years is a long time to be president or to do anything, really. And, I began my presidency not knowing how it would end. And frankly, that's still open-ended for me. And so I have had to kind of retrain my brain to be comfortable with that existential openness of saying, I'm engaged in work that it may go through many phases. I may not know what all of those phases are right now. It may be much more active sometimes than it is at other times. People might ask me, are you still doing that? And I'll say, yes, I am. Thank you for asking.
No, but that is so important what you're saying, Madam President. The idea of, not putting all of our eggs in one basket, not, planning for the big march, waiting for the gallery opening and so on and so forth. But this idea that it's a long road and it's constant, we don't know where it's going to end and we don't know what turns it's going to take. And I like you said, it's sort of almost an existential space to occupy for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. And I've really tried to talk to people when they know about my work and have been excited about my work, when I do feel stuck, and say, either bounce ideas off of them or just find out more about what is resonating for them and try to use that to help me imagine, well, if that worked even a little bit, right? What could I do that might be more like that, rather than more like this other thing that I did that didn't really work?
Right, great.
So there's some questions coming in here, and I just want to invite the citizens and the people watching around the world to send in their questions that we can ask. It's rare that you get this kind of access to the President of the United States, but here we are. Before we get to those, though, I wanted to ask you one other thing, which was, every so often the President gives like a Medal of Honor. And things like that. There's these sort of, and there's the White House Correspondents' Dinner, stuff like that. What do you have planned in the future around these sort of traditional, regular events?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Steve.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
no problem. Whenever possible, I do try to take advantage of some of the established and built-in rituals of the presidency, and to make sure that I am both continuing our country's traditions, but to make sure that I am also leveraging those opportunities to either help get out the word about other great individuals or organizations, or to just help shine a light in a direction where a light should be shown. So I don't have an immediate plan that I can share with you right now, but I appreciate those suggestions.
Right. Steve, we can't hear you for some reason.
I think it was maybe some surveillance. It's something we will keep for another topic, for another time.
I have some questions from the audience.
Okay.
One is from Alicia. Alicia says, "Dear Madam President, I am so glad that you became president. I cannot imagine what this country would look like if Donald Trump had become president last year. While I see your presidency is making great progress in the country, I wonder if you could speak to how you, as a white woman and as a Bay Area resident, how you've been able to bridge the divides in the country, and how you had any, or have you had any pushback from an electorate who disagrees with some of your executive actions, executive orders?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your question, Alicia. So, I'll refer back to a little bit about what we were saying earlier. I am only one person. And so while I am the president, yes, I am a white woman, and there's privilege attendant in that, right? There's privilege attendant in race, there's privilege attendant in being cisgender, there's privilege attendant in being straight passing, there's privilege attendant in growing up middle class. And as president, I do believe that it's my duty to acknowledge and, when possible, attempt to unpack some of the privilege that I've been given based on my role in society. But beyond that, I think that it's so vital that we work together to try to reduce the benefits that privilege confers upon people in society, right? So part of the goals of my administration is to work for a more just, a more equitable, a more diverse, a more welcoming country. And that's part of why I open source the government as well, so that anyone who is interested in participating, who says, I want to see this done differently in the United States, can speak with me directly, and we'll work together on developing that policy and getting it out in the world.
Right. We have another question from Celeste, and if you have other questions, please type them in now. It takes a minute for us to get those in and then to see them. She says, Madam President, would you support elections for First Lady? she cites Beth Lapidus, who was a performance artist in New York. I'm not sure if you know this other previous campaign, but yeah, we can pass that along to you. And or a first gent, or is just POTUS is the main position?
So I appreciate this question so much, because I think that one thing that being the first female president has made clear to a lot of people is that over time in the United States, the role of First Lady has become a job, right? And there are duties and expectations that we put upon that person, and we say, you need to execute these things in this fashion on this time frame. That's a job. And for too long, that has been unpaid female labor. I personally find this completely unacceptable. So I'm open to considering elections. I'm also open to considering it a position appointed by the president, as we appoint, secretaries of various positions. Naturally, they would need to be qualified. They would need to be vetted by Congress. It would be an open process, as all government appointees are and should be. But I think that if we are looking for people to do labor, both traditional and emotional labor, on behalf of our nation, we need to acknowledge that work, and we need to pay for it.
That is such a good point, because when you think about all the work that it takes just to be the partner of someone who is in the role of president, how could we expect them? I mean, it can be so difficult. And how could we expect them to be able to achieve anything like, say, ending cyberbullying, on top of that, right? That's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
If you have any other questions, type them in. We have a few announcements. I hope you don't mind, Madam President. I know that you have a very yeah, here we go. So, yes, if you want, you've been very active on social media. A lot of people have commented on your presence on Twitter and other social media, and the response that you're able to incite isn't the word, but to elicit, yes, on social media. You are first female POTUS on Twitter, Instagram. You've written papers on Medium, YouTube, and Facebook, and then you have a website, which is firstfemalepotus.us. So that's there.
And Madam President, you mentioned before that you would like people to propose ideas for your administration. What would be the best way for them to reach you? Through your website?
Yeah, on my website, there's a get in touch form. It's really easy to fill out, and you can let me know what you're interested in and what degree you'd like to be involved with.
You are such a person of the people.
Thank you. I reached out to people like Dianne Feinstein, right, and asked her she still emails me, and I haven't lived there for 12 years. But yeah, I would write her letters, and she would just give me these canned responses back. Is that what you do?
No, I don't give canned responses. I believe that this kind of personal contact, hearing directly from constituents, this is what democracy is all about, right?
They reach out to you. They're not gonna. It's not some aide that writes back. Some unpaid.
No, it's me.
Okay. All right. So of course we wanted to say thank you to you. That is one of our announcements. We also here at the center, we are looking for part-time help. We have a couple positions. I'll get that link on our website here for that. But I just want to point out, Madam President, we are job creators.
That's fantastic, Steve. And it's small business owners and innovators like the two of you that are helping build the fabric of our society.
Yeah, I'm proud that we are a nonprofit, if you want to call that a business, but.
Yes, I use the term business very broadly.
Okay.
I recognize that you're a nonprofit, and I think it's so important, as a former nonprofit professional myself,
Sure.
The work of nonprofits often goes overlooked, and yet so much of our social network, education, health, veteran support, I could go on, is provided by the nonprofit sector. And so I do want to take a moment to thank you both for your service to our country and for the work that you're doing to help connect artists, activists, and other passionate people who want to help change the world into a better and more perfect union.
Beautiful. We also have some upcoming webinars. There's two. One is next week. It's on corruption, and we will send you an email about this.
Not something we have to worry about in your administration.
Okay.
No,
Obviously.
no. Really proud of how you have brought integrity. I mean, I thought there was integrity before, but it's just at new levels.
Yep.
The integrity that you've brought to the White House, and your willingness to sort of step away from your own personal finance and release your tax returns and so on. It's really quite.
I mean, I didn't have a lot of money, so it was easy to be transparent about it.
So we have the corruption one, and I'm pasting that into the chat right now. And then we have one called Hilariouch, which is about humor and politics with Marlene Ramirez-Cancio, who is a lot of fun. And that is, maybe you want to join in on that one, Madam President.
Oh, I'd love to listen in.
Yeah.
Maybe she can write a speech for the correspondence dinner.
Right. Right. Our last little announcement is, as of today, the Center for Artistic Activism is not going to put any energy into Facebook. And we wrote a little article about why we came to this decision. It was actually, we started around the time of your election. We started thinking about this, and we spent a year. We were kind of busy. We didn't focus on it the whole year, but a year later, we decided, Facebook isn't the most healthy place. And it also just isn't working for us. So there's a op-ed that I wrote and Steve helped out with that is in Art News today, and it's on our website. And if you go to our Facebook page, it's there also. That's the last thing that we're doing until it changes, or that might be it. So I will put in a link to that. And I think that's it. Do we have any other questions? We do not. If you have any other questions, get them in. I'm going to put your info back up there while I grab that Facebook thing. But do you have any closing remarks? You do get the last word here.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I do want to thank you both for having me as a guest today. As I said, I always appreciate any opportunity to speak directly with the public. And so it's been a pleasure to discuss the joys and the challenges of serving in this role. And I really want to encourage everyone listening, whatever crazy, weird, terrible seeming idea that you think you can't possibly do, you probably can.
Thank you, Madam President. Words to live by.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I also want to thank you for this small, you did reach out to us early on and asked for our input on your administration, and it was an honor. It was an honor.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, and that's a wonderful service that you both provide through the Center for Artistic Activism. Your willingness to speak with people about their work, whether it's in even a very early phase, I think is a huge resource. And I don't want to make an offer for you, but if you're open to speaking with other people, they should really hit you up.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's something that maybe we should put on the front page of our website, that we advised the first female president of the United States. That is kind of, we don't really talk about that enough, do we?
No, we don't.
I think you should give yourselves credit.
Yes, we should.
Well, President Margaret McCarthy, thank you for taking the time today. I also want to thank all of our viewers today, the people that have tuned in to for this. It is a great honor, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.